Hello everyone, I'm Drifting, and today I'm going to be talking about a relatively unique Korean web novel. Um, I don't know Korean, so excuse my pronunciation, but I'm going to give it my best shot. But the title is 천재 편집자의 이중생활, um, otherwise known as The Double Life of a Genius Editor. The publisher's JHS. You can find it on Naver and Kakao page, and the English title is The Double Life of a Genius Editor. Now, originally, I was actually going to, the author's one, by the way. I think it just translates to one. I was originally going to cover another very famous Korean web novel called The Novelist Who Leapt Through Time, but I realized it was already covered by two other Korean web novel YouTubers. Panchung, they go under the YouTube tag Novel Fantasy, and I can't pronounce the other guy's name. It's something like Nabig, Navigagoy Websosol Iyagi. He's an online novel publisher, or he is an online web novel writer. And Panchung is a very dedicated reader. Both of these guys very know their web novels very well. I've been following novel fantasy for a little bit. I don't speak Korean, so I usually just translate their transcripts. But they both know the web novel industry very well. Novel fantasy in particular did this 3 months ago, and um, Nabe Gogi Websosol Yagi, otherwise known as Butterfly Valley. He covered the novelist who left their time 7 months ago, so they definitely beat me to the punch. Now, what made the novelist who left their time very special was it's a do-over urban life web novel with a lot of romantic aspects of it, kind of like the Japanese web novel The Genius Girl Who Kept Challenging a Reborn Man Like Me or Starting Over. And I found a lot of similarities to The Great Storyteller, but also a lot of small differences as well. The Great Storyteller was very much a do-over novel focused much more on literature and writing, so it's much more school life, middle school focused. Great person. Whereas the novelist who leapt through time focuses much more on romantic and drama aspects. For example, two characters you'll be familiar with in the novelist who leapt through time is Guyuna, another rival or childhood writer, and the actor Kim Byul. So there's a lot more acting involved, kind of like the great storyteller, where you have directors Oh Tae-sol, President Baek Seung Wong. Okay, trust me, I don't know Korean, so my pronunciation's definitely off. Um, but it takes a very unique tone where like you have that foresight or foreknowledge. The great storyteller is all about great writing, so they go into the Nebula Awards and the Hugo Awards. Um, this one was unique. I'm trying to remember. Just much more for the drama aspects. They went into things like the Booker Awards, various French awards. There's like the Booker Awards, which is in England. French Writing Award. What's the French Writing Award? Oh, the Goncourt, right? Yeah, that's correct. Um, which is the French Literary Prize. And then various other writing awards as well. So that was actually very cool. Um, I'm pretty sure this is the novelist who left through time. I'm gonna get this confused with the Double Life of a Genius Editor. But the reason why I chose a Genius Life, the Double Life of a Genius Editor, um, is its pure passion. Now, if we were to evaluate this from a web novel standpoint, the various genres it touches through, I'm instantly brought to The Man's Man, right? Very much business, political aspect where you're climbing up the corporate ladder. You have a business antagonist, you have a hero, but what really stood out to me was its familiarity with the web novel landscape. It talks about web novel, right, Tailwind, which I think was an allegory to Tencent. Um, you talked a lot about the history of Korean web novels, which is not something you get used to. You saw S-Tune, you saw Munpia, they were mentioned, which I thought was really cool. So that goes back to Kakao and Naver and their acquisitions into Wuxia World, into Wattpad. They talk a little bit about that, but they talk a lot about the Korean landscape and the famous Korean authors like Kang Chul, who wrote Solo Leveling. right? I think in English it translates to I am alone. But famous titles that changed the web novel landscape. Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint, which I didn't realize was written that recently. Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint was only written in 2018. X Rank, right? There are a lot of famous writers that actually were born from Novelpia awards, right? Or Seo Sol awards. So a lot of famous web novel writers actually came from these award seasons that are hosted annually, and the history of how contracts are signed by writers. And so the main premise of the double life of a genius editor is to create a fairer web novel landscape. And if you haven't seen a lot of the content covered by a lot of other niche web novel history, Bilibili station channels, right? B station, pizza, video creators, they talk a lot about this age of gold swallowing beasts, right? Like Tencent and Naver and Winpia, whereas like a lot of these writers are under unfair contracts. Now, it's kind of interesting because in the Chinese side, they say a lot about, oh, you can now make a living by writing, right? But it's much more like writing is now controlled by these white whales, right? Where it's like, you're writing to make money each character, you get a certain character. Whereas in Korea, it's much more repressed where it's like, oh, they're making people sign these unfair contracts, these entertainment contracts where you have to sign for like 3 to 5 years, and it's all on the platform owner side, right? Things like Cheatia and Naver, like they control these large platforms and you have to publish exclusively on there, right? Like webtoons or whatnot, where you say, oh, it's for the benefit of writers and fans. And I think it doesn't really quite get to the heart of the conflict between the platform owners, the writers, the content creators, UGC is what it's called in business terms, user generated content, and the fans. The fans want more content. The writers and platform owners want to make more profit, right? But the person who really gets squeezed are the writers because if they don't write, fans are unhappy. And usually people blame the authors when, a lot of blame is shared between the platform owners and the writers, right? Everyone just has their own incentives. And so there's this conflict of interest between these three parties, and that's a very difficult avenue to navigate. Now, a lot of this is much more profit oriented. You'll see that with Kadokawa and Bookwalker, right? Yen Press, their whole conglomerate situation. Shueisha, every single every single country has their own different corporate structures. Japan is considered this haven of anime and games, right? It's this mecca proverbial export media giant. It's got so much soft power, right? And then you have competitors like China with their low-paying animation studios creating these games by hoyovers, right? Again, soft power. Korea has a lot of these lesser of these export restrictions because of their connection, but obviously if they have a smaller economy compared to Japan. And then you have the US, which has Hollywood. So it's not as big into animation, but still has this huge media like industry empire, right? So a lot of these facets are explored. And the double life of a genius editor goes much more at the beginning goes much more into an editor business aspect and later on kind of goes into the web novel industry, not as in depth as I would like it. And in terms of storytelling, it's not super strong, but it's unique in that you can tell it's passionate. It's a fanboy web novel that I would like to write. Now, as a critic, I can say a lot, but at the end of the day, I'm not writing this. There's actually a writer who writes this, and author one, actually did what he wrote. He actually wrote a web novel. And that's hard. If you write, you'll realize it's easy to criticize, but it's hard to create. And in terms of writing, The Novelist Who Left Their Time, I would say, is a much more enjoyable, fun web novel. But in terms of commentary wise, The Double Life of a Genius Editor is unique in the sense that it opens up that editor aspect that you would see in Bakuman. Um, the Japanese manga creation anime, right? Or you go into Hideaki Anno's mecha history with Evangelion, right? Or Gurren Lagann. Those are the famous Japanese titles. But nowadays you see the rise of Korean light novel titles like Solo Leveling, that was huge. Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint, which grew up, right? Um, Lord of Mysteries. And these are very niche titles in the greater entertainment genre, but these are huge titles in the web novel industry. There's few people who do not know these titles, right? The various Korean TV shows. There's so many terms I don't get, like sweet potato, or what even OTT means. But like, I didn't realize Netflix was such a big role. I didn't realize Netflix injected so much money into the Korean entertainment industry. Now, if you look at Netflix and you watch the TV shows, or if you own a subscription, you'll see a lot of K dramas, right? But I never really understood how much money flew into the country just through streaming services, because it's only Netflix that purchases Korean IPs. Said before, they're owned by Naver and Tencent and Kakao. Kakao, like Munpia, they did some stuff with ENCNY, CNB Entertainment. I remember seeing that acquisition back in 2018. They bought out Munpia in 2016. Tencent liquidated their assets in 2020. I went into China Literature's financial statements and I tracked that down. But it's very interesting to see a lot of these events that I'm familiar with, this contemporary history, being written to a web novel. And again, there's a lot of content creators, I think I talked about this before in the history of web novels, that lament these passing eras. And hopefully I'll show you some Kadokawa slides um, and some China literature slides. I don't know Korean as much, so I won't be able to go onto the Namu wiki. But it was really cool to see both aspects, both as a writer and an editor. And for those who want to criticize the double life of a genius editor, right, like its writing style and how it's not that fun, I will agree with that rating. But I also do want to get to the heart of web novels, which is it is a fantasy. Writing is a fantasy to explore things that you may not be able to see in daily life. And in that sense, the goal of the double life of a genius editor, like that simple wish to create fair contracts and a cool web novel story. I think it fulfills that. Is it as awesome as Solo Leveling, where the novelist who leapt through time? I would say maybe not as great. But if you're talking about dreaming big in that fantasy, in like kind of breaking that mold, but not really, I think it fulfills that requirement spectacularly. It gives this grand fantasy of yes, I can invest in Bitcoin and I can become this very rich person with this do-over genre. But I think what the do-over genre allows you to do, which I think it should do, is pursue a great goal, right? Which is like, I don't just want to be rich. I want to change the world, right? That spiritual fulfillment of I want to change something. And in terms of that type of dreaming fantasy for do-over, I think the double life of a genius editor fulfills that perfectly. Like it dreams and it dreams big. And in the process, it talks about a lot of these small facets in the 201 chapters that it is given, right? It's still a Korean web novel. And there's some web novels that go for 600, 800 chapters, but those are a rarity. Most Korean web novels are 200 and then they finish, which I think is an interesting length. It's a great contrast from a lot of Chinese web novels that want to go for 1,000, 2,000 chapters. You will rarely see a 1,000 chapter long Korean web novel. I think the only two that come to mind is X Rank, which is what I was reading recently. X Rank supporting roles replay and supporting high school and stuff. But I thought that was really cool, and I just wanted to highlight the double life of a genius editor. So that's about it. That's the double life of a genius editor. I'll give another shot at the Korean title. 천재 편집자의 이중생활 by Juan. JHS is the publisher. You can find it on Naver. And we'll stop here.